All right, here we go. You should all now be seeing my presentation. If you are not, please go ahead and make a note in the chat. I will keep an eye on that throughout the presentation. And definitely as you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. Hopefully I will get to a lot of your questions just throughout my presentation. And then at the end, I will run through any questions in the chat and cover as many as we can in the next hour that we have here together. So I am Dr. Janet Beagle. I am the Senior Director of Graduate Programs here at Purdue University's College of Engineering. And I have been here at Purdue for almost 20 years now. I was the director of graduate admissions over in our central graduate school for a number of years, and then have been in the College of Engineering for about 10 years since then. So a lot of experience with kind of the application process, the funding for grad school. A lot of what I do in my role is work with graduate students who are in the process of applying to grad school. And then I also help students once they are actually here work through the program. So what we're going to talk about today is just the funding for graduate school, what the process is. I want to talk a little bit about who gets funding, how the funding process works, the types of funding, and then we'll cover some tips for finding funding. And also at the very end, I'll talk a little bit about how do you evaluate funding offers that you're getting from different universities, because I think that's really important to be considering as you're going through. So to start off, so that you all have a sense of where I am joining you from this evening or this morning, for those of you who are the other side of the world, I am joining you from Purdue University. We are here in Indiana, in the central part of the United States. We're a couple hours south of Chicago, Illinois, about an hour north of Indianapolis, really centrally located to a lot of places around the country. So you can kind of see where we are located there. And our College of Engineering here at Purdue, which is where I'm located, we are the largest engineering program in the top 10 in the United States. We've got 5,600, actually more now, 5,600 engineering graduate students just in our College of Engineering. And the photo on the screen here just gives you a sense of part of our campus. So the background photo is kind of what we call our engineering quadrant. A lot of those are our engineering buildings. We've got 14 different schools and departments across the college. Anything you can think of within engineering we can do. And then we have our new innovation district, and that's kind of the inset photo there. With Discovery Park, a lot of interdisciplinary research, a lot of innovation, entrepreneurship, and things happening down there. So a lot of really exciting things happening here at Purdue as I'm joining you here tonight. So as we jump into our topic, one of the main things that I want to take away, if you leave with nothing else, is that there is funding available for graduate school. Right? And so there are different opportunities, and we're going to talk through what those are, but don't ever let funding graduate school be a barrier for you to not even try. Give it a try, make sure you're applying, because there is funding available. About 70% of our grad students here at Purdue receive some kind of funding. So the important question then is kind of who gets funding, and this is really important as you're thinking about your graduate school journey, what type of degree program you're pursuing, and the different opportunities that are there. And so the most funding is always going to go to PhD students. And the types of opportunities they have the most opportunities for fellowships, as well as research assistantships, teaching assistantships, and general graduate assistantships. And I'm going to go through each of those in a little bit more detail as we go through, so you have a good understanding of what these different types of funding are. But the main thing I want you to take away from this slide, PhD students are the ones that will get the most amount of money as we go through. The next most common type of student that's going to get funded is the thesis master's student. These are students who are at the master's level that are pursuing research as part of their degree. And so they have the same types of opportunities that are open to PhD students, except there just aren't quite as many of them. There's just a few fellowships as well as the RATA and GA. As you move through the different types of degrees, the non-thesis master's degree, so those who are not doing research. So these are course-based master's degrees. Some of these may be done online. Some of them may be more professional in nature, which I'll talk about in a minute. But those that are just course-based, these are going to have fewer funding opportunities because they're not doing research. They're not going to have the RA opportunities. They also generally are not eligible for fellowships. And so the types of opportunities these students have is going to be limited to more of those teaching assistantships and the general GAs. We find more individuals that are pursuing a non-thesis master's who are either self-funded, paying their own way, or they may be employer-funded. They may be working full-time and coming to grad school part-time and using some employer benefits to pay for that degree. And then the last category here is the professional master's. And so those are not eligible for funding. And so those are either self-funded, which means that you are paying for it yourself, or you are using employer benefits. If again, you are someone who is working full-time and then using the benefits from your employer to pursue that professional master's degree. Often those professional master's programs have, as the name implies, kind of a professional component. They tend to be very targeted to very specific industries and career tracks. And those that are pursuing more of a professional degree, management type positions, industry focused, regulatory compliance, a lot of things that require some additional education, but not the research component as you go through. And so being aware of the different types of degrees that are out there and the funding opportunities is really important as you get going. So let's talk about what are these different types of funding opportunities that you have. So there's really three types of graduate assistantships. The most common that you'll hear a lot is research assistantships. These are abbreviated RAs. And this is where you work part-time, helping a faculty member with their research. And then in return, you receive a lot of benefits, including paycheck, free tuition, etc. We'll talk more about those benefits in a minute. A teaching assistantship is, as the name implies, you are helping with teaching. And many of you may have classes that have TAs in them. And so you may be familiar with this from your current experiences. And this is where you help a professor either teach a course, or often you will help lead lab sections. If it's a course that has a lab section, you often help with like homework sessions, extra help for the students in the class, grading, helping to create the exams, office hours, things like that. Sometimes as part of this, you may start to get some experience actually leading a lecture, but often when you first start out, at least in a TA position, it's more these supporting type roles. And then as you gain more experience, you start to take on more of a lecture type role as well. And then the last type of graduate assistantship is what we call administrative professional. And these are abbreviated either AP for administrative professional or GA, which is just a general graduate assistantship. And with these, it is more like office type work. And so, for example, on my team, we are located in the Central College, and I hire grad assistants who help us support a database. You know, they have some programming skills, and I hire them to support that. We have GAs that help us with different recruitment outreach and activities. Any kind of like office job that you can think of, our libraries hires GAs. There are different types of positions like this around the university that you might not often think about because they're more on that administrative side. They're a little bit more behind the scenes, but almost any kind of major unit or office on a university probably hires at least some grad assistants to help them with their office operations and the administration of the university. So let's talk about some of the benefits. If you are able to secure one of these graduate assistantships, what does that mean? And so as I already mentioned, this is part-time employment. And so the vernacular or the way people talk about these is half-time, which means that you're working 20 hours a week, or quarter time, which means that you're working 10 hours a week. And as part of your part-time employment, you receive free tuition. So you don't pay any tuition to the university, and then you also receive a paycheck for your work. And there's often other benefits depending on the specific type of position you have and whether it's quarter time or half time. So for example, most half-time positions will also have things like paid health insurance, you'll have paid vacation time, sick leave. Sometimes there are educational benefits like reduced tuition for spouses or for children. Because you are a part-time employee, you're considered an employee of the university. And so you get some of the benefits that a typical employee would have of that university. When you think about applying for these, you're typically considered as part of admission, and we're going to talk more about this process in a minute. But some may have a separate application. So that's just something to be aware of. Often more the teaching assistantships, and especially some of those administrative professional or the GA positions will have more of an application associated with them. And I see the question in the chat, whether the benefits of tuition apply for any level of assistantship, and the answer is yes. So whether it's a quarter time or a half time, you do get the free tuition as part of that. These types of graduate assistantships can be awarded for a full year, an academic year, or by semester or quarter. And so when we talk about kind of evaluating your funding offer, this is something to be aware of, is what is the term of this employment? Sometimes you're just offered a position for a shorter period of time. Sometimes it's guaranteed for a full year or even longer. And one of the tips that I have is, as you're getting ready to apply and then when you're in the application process, make sure you are contacting faculty who are doing research in your area of interest. If you remember those different types of assistantships, one of the main ones is a research assistantship. And the faculty are the ones that will be hiring individuals to do that. And so you need to be reaching out to them and letting them know that you're in the process of applying, that you're very interested in their research. So that's kind of the graduate assistantships. The other type of funding that I mentioned is fellowships. And these are very similar to an undergraduate scholarship. They're very prestigious, they are competitive, they're very merit-based. So if you think about that kind of number I said, about 70% of our graduate students receive funding, about 4% of those is fellowships, and then the other 66% are assistantships. Right. And so the fellowships are really elite. They are given to the best of the applications that are coming in. The eligibility, the benefits, and the requirements will vary widely when it comes to these fellowships, and especially whether they are internal to a university or external. And what I mean by that, internal means that they are being awarded by the university. So here at Purdue, we have money set aside that are fellowships, and we award them to students who are coming to Purdue. There are also external fellowships, which means that you are applying to an external agency. So something like a government agency, sometimes professional organizations, nonprofits will have fellowships similar to scholarships that you can apply for and then use them at whatever institution you choose to go to. When we talk about fellowships, usually what we're referring to is this idea of a full fellowship, and that would typically include tuition, a monthly stipend, which is your paycheck, and then health insurance, potentially additional benefits as well. There are also partial fellowships that come in a lot of different forms. So sometimes different people will use different terminology. And so it's important to understand when somebody is talking about a fellowship, what they mean by that. Generally, like when I and many of my colleagues talk about fellowships, we're talking about these full fellowships, right, that are really paying for your graduate education. But you'll also see different agencies talk about fellowships like travel fellowships, things like that. Often we refer to those more as grants. They're more of a smaller and kind of one-time funding. So things like travel grants that you can apply for to get money to go to a conference, and other opportunities like that. So just be aware when you're coming across websites, when you're just doing searches for funding, that different agencies may use that term fellowship in slightly different ways. So make sure you understand what they are referring to, what the benefits actually are, what the criteria are, and any obligations that some of those fellowships will have. For example, some external fellowships, if they are being offered from a certain agency, or some companies may even offer some kind of fellowship. Some governments may provide fellowship funding, but then have a requirement that when you finish your degree, you return to that country and work for a while, or you work for that company for a while, or you perform some kind of professional development or service back to that organization. And so just be aware of some of those requirements that might be there. So generally, you cannot hold more than one fellowship at a time, but you're often able to use them in sequence. And so if you are lucky enough to receive multiple fellowships, and every year we have some students who do this, they may receive a Purdue, like an internal fellowship, and then they may also receive an external fellowship, like the National Science Foundation. And while you can't stack them and kind of get double money during that time, you can use them in sequence, because often fellowships are for a certain period of time. For example, the National Science Foundation is for 3 years. A Purdue fellowship maybe for like 2 years. And so you can use that NSF for 3 years and then do the Purdue fellowship for 2 years, and you have your entire graduate PhD paid for through those fellowships. So just something to be aware of, and to never hesitate applying to multiple fellowships, because if you are able to receive multiple, even if you can't use them all at the same time, there are usually some real benefits to having them. Most fellowships are available in the fall term. So like an August start is what we have here at Purdue. It's fairly common for a lot of universities in the US. And a lot of the fellowships follow that fall start cycle. And you often apply for them, for those that are external, 1 year out. And so right now, those of you that may be getting ready to apply for grad school now, is to be applying to your grad schools, also be applying for those external fellowships for a start of next fall as well. And then also watch for any kind of optional essays on applications at different universities. There are sometimes things on the application that are marked as optional, and they may not be needed for admission, but they may be looked at as part of funding. And so that's something to just make sure you understand as you're reading the instructions for different applications. And if you have questions, reach out to somebody in that graduate program and confirm, right? If they say this part of the application is optional, are you still considered for funding without it? Because there are some times where it's optional because they don't use it for admission, but it may be needed for certain types of fellowships or certain types of funding. And so make sure you understand what some of those different criteria may be. And I see the couple questions in the chat. We're going to kind of get to that as we go through here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the funding process. So you will automatically be considered for some funding when you apply to grad school. So your application for admission is also your application for funding. So if you think about kind of the process, you think about it as kind of this triangle. We've got this group of students that is admitted, and those tippy top students, those are the ones who are going to receive the fellowship. Remember, I said about 4% of students at Purdue receive those fellowships. That next largest chunk is going to be those who receive different types of assistantships, whether those are research assistantships, teaching assistantships, or those general graduate assistantships. And then that last pool are those who are admitted, but the money has kind of run out, if you will. And so those are the unfunded students as part of this process. And as I mentioned before, PhD students will be funded first. So typically, close to 100% of admitted PhD students will receive some kind of funding. And then closer to about 50% of our master students will receive some kind of funding. So you can also apply directly for external fellowships. And I've kind of alluded to that a couple of times here, and I'm going to give you some examples as we go through. And then those administrative assistantships are often ones that you don't see when you're in the process of applying, because they are ones that are more in like office settings, and they're usually emailed out to current students. There usually is an application process. Occasionally you can find them if you are looking for funding and you talk to your department, you get on kind of an email list where they send out job postings ahead of arriving at the university. But this is a funding source that often is more available once you're already there and you start to develop your network and you are able to see opportunities that are there. So if we think about the research assistantship process, and I think this sheds some light as well on like kind of why PhD and why those thesis master students have the most funding opportunities. So the way the research assistantship process works is you have faculty, these professors who have an idea, and they submit grant proposals in order to receive research funds. So they can send proposals into government agencies, corporations, different nonprofit organizations, basically saying, this is my experience, this is my skill set, this is the research that I would like to do for you, and this is why I'm the best person who's qualified to do that. And then if those different agencies like what they see and they say, oh, this looks like a professor who can really help us out with this, this question that we have, then they will fund that proposal and they send money back to the faculty member to conduct the research. And then it's that point then that the faculty looks to hire all of you to then help them come in and conduct that research, because the professor then has received this money from the agency. They have a certain amount of time that they need to deliver results. And they need some researchers to help them do that. I'm about ready to cough. Let me take a drink. And so if you think about this from a faculty perspective and who they would want to hire onto their research teams, it makes sense that they are primarily going to focus on PhD students initially, because they are going to be there the longest. And they generally come in with the most amount of experience. After the PhD students are funded, then they're going to be looking for those thesis-based research master's students, because they also then are coming and pursuing research as part of their degree and working through that process. So talk about external fellowships. And as I mentioned before, these are fellowships that you apply to directly. And so these are things you can be searching for and identifying right now, and the types of organizations to look at. And there's different government agencies, nonprofits, professional organizations. I'm going to give you some links here in a minute that are going to help you with your search. I already kind of talked about kind of the variation that you can see in these, so just be aware of that. And again, be aware that they can be kind of full or partial fellowships. So make sure you're aware of what it is that you're applying for and any requirements that they have, if they require you to work or serve or anything like that as part of it. And you want to be applying for these, again, kind of 1 year before you plan to start grad school. So some tips for finding funding, you're kind of going through this. First and foremost, understand your program's funding process, because every program operates a little bit differently. Some of you who attended the application tips process yesterday, this may be something that she talked about, right? You know, they all kind of set their own admission requirements. They all kind of set their own processes and procedures for different things, and that includes funding. And so make sure that you are reading the web pages, understanding how funding works in that department. You know, do they have an application for TA appointments, or do they not? My dog is saying hello to all of you. And know that if there is kind of an extra application, that you are completing what is needed, you know, or are they using just the application for admission? You should go through that. And then consider what makes sense for your situation, right? Make sure you're Googling options, review our list that I'm going to share in just a moment. There are times where it makes sense to pay for your own graduate education, especially if you're pursuing kind of one of those professional masters or non-thesis masters. Some of those are accelerated degrees. Some of them you are able to complete in as little as a year. And so it can make sense sometimes that you invest that money up front. You're able to, you know, secure this degree and then move on to the rest of your career that you want. Other times, no, like it makes sense to really pursue funding, and you're pursuing one of those degrees that's research-based. You want to be looking for those different funding opportunities as you go through. So as I mentioned before, you want to be reaching out to faculty before, during, and after applying. And you're absolutely right. You mentioned in the chat, you know, sometimes faculty do not respond. So yes, often faculty do not respond. That's very common. And part of that is just how busy they are. They are receiving like hundreds, sometimes literally thousands of inquiries from incoming graduate students or students who are just, you know, kind of seeking out, you know, maybe not even applying yet. And so the ways to make yourself stand out, you want to make sure you're keeping your emails very short, you know, just like a few sentences when I'm talking about short, very professional and very research focused. Make sure you're really talking about what your interests are, you know, mention that you are where you are kind of in the application process. If you have already applied, if you are in the process of applying, and anything that makes you a real strong candidate for their research lab. So make sure you have done your homework ahead of time. You understand what type of research they're doing in their lab and mention that. You know, if you can read a couple of their journal articles ahead of time and talk about how your interests align with theirs. You often still will not get a reply from faculty, but what you then do is when you're in the application process, there is a place on the application where you will list faculty that you are interested in working with. So make sure you then list those faculty. And then you can email the faculty back again and let them know, hey, I just submitted my application. I'm still really interested in working with you. What that's going to do, it's going to do a couple of things. One, by listing them on the application, as those applications are reviewed, it's going to be flagged for that particular faculty member to take a look at it and review it. And so it's going to get across their desk at least. And even if they didn't get a chance to reply to your email, they're probably going to remember. It's amazing to me sometimes what faculty members remember, right? You know, they may not get a chance to reply, but they'll remember, oh, this name looks familiar. I remember this student emailed me. And then at that point, they may go back and kind of look at your email and follow up at that point. There are a lot of professors who will not reply to cold inquiries until they've had a chance to look at your application. But it still never hurts to kind of send that email initially. And then when you apply, follow up and let them know, hey, I submitted my application. I'm still really interested in your research. And then hopefully they take a look at your application, are able to respond back. This is also why it's really important to make sure you understand the funding process for your particular program as well, because some schools, and they'll lay it out on their application, or like admitted student visits, they'll talk about kind of the process there. Some schools have very, and when I talk about schools, some departments, different majors, so schools or departments have like very set criteria in how they go about kind of an advisor process and the funding process. And they can kind of help guide you. Some of them will say, you know, we want you to just very independently be reaching out to faculty. That's kind of our culture here. Others will say, you know, you can reach out to faculty, but really the matching happens once you've been admitted, and then you start kind of a process and they help guide you. And so understanding kind of that timeline and the culture difference within the different disciplines in engineering and how a particular university works and how a particular program within that university works is really important. And then last thing there, just kind of attach your resume as part of that, so that if they do want more information, they can see that. Kind of already mentioned this, you know, mention your faculty of interest in your application as they go through to that. So the question, you know, will GRE be considered for funding decision in life sciences department for PhD? And so this, again, it'll vary by the discipline. So some of our programs require the GRE and some don't. So you'll want to be looking at the application and the admission requirements there. All right, let me get through a couple more slides here and then I'll come back to some of the questions. All right, so some specific fellowship opportunities. This was a question that I saw in the chat too, is how do we find out about these different opportunities? Well, here you go. And I'll put some of these links in the chat too, once I kind of wrap up and get into the Q&A. So a couple of the Purdue fellowship opportunities, the Ross, the Andrews, Lynn, these are the most common types of fellowships. These are all done through faculty nomination. And so there is no separate application. There is nothing you can do to kind of apply for these or anything related to that. It all comes back again to your application for admission. And if you remember that little triangle that I showed you at the beginning, they kind of have that admitted student pool. And when the admission committee is reviewing those, they say, okay, these are the top students. These are the ones we're going to offer our fellowships to. And that all happens through that application for admission. Those of you who are on the call tonight who are here at Purdue, be aware of this particular fellowship. It's the Charles C. Chappell Fellowship. This is for Purdue undergrads who are continuing on with their grad study at Purdue. And there is a separate application for this fellowship. So make sure you are in, the deadline's usually around January. So make sure you are aware of this one and submitting your application for this one. That's a great opportunity. And then there's just more information out on our website there. And I'll stick that link in the chat as well as I wrap up. As we talk about external fellowship opportunities, there are a lot of different opportunities out here. The link at the bottom of this slide, we list close to 100 different fellowship opportunities out on one of our websites that you can take a look at. And very similar again to scholarships, they are very diverse in terms of what they have to offer and what the eligibility are, right? You know, we have some that are for specific countries, some that are for specific discipline areas. You just have to kind of sort through and identify those that would be a fit for you, and then go ahead and try applying for them. A couple of the big ones that I want to mention to make sure you're aware of, the GEM Fellowship for domestic students here in the US. This is an opportunity to apply for that, and there is an opportunity to receive an application fee waiver to Purdue when you apply for the GEM Fellowship. So definitely take a look at that. The NSF Fellowship, this is for US citizens and permanent residents. And this is one of the most prestigious national awards here in the US. Definitely take a look at that. That is, as I mentioned, a 3-year award. It's $37,000 per year that you are given with that, in addition to free tuition and things like that with your university. And then for our international students who are on the call tonight, Education USA. If you are not familiar with that organization, definitely learn about them. They have agencies in countries all around the world, and they support students who are in other countries who want to study in the United States. And they have a lot of resources on their website, as well as funding information. And they have advisors as well that can help guide you through things. So a few opportunities there. Definitely check them out. Okay. And then I want to just talk a little bit here as we wrap up with tips for evaluating offers, and then I'll come back through the chat and answer any questions that I haven't gotten to yet. So one of the main things I like to talk about here is make sure that you are aware of the cost of living for the area that you are considering, because this can be kind of a hidden value in different offers, right? If you receive the same amount of money from two different universities, but one of them is in a location that is going to cost you much more to have a place to live and travel and just have all of the expenses that are necessary for that, then that makes a big difference when you're kind of evaluating those offers. So this is just a map that I pulled up. If you Google Purdue cost of living map, this will come up. There's lots of different cost of living calculators out there. You can find one that you like and use that and be able to use that. The GEM fellowship is not available for international students. That one is strictly for US. So the other thing I'll say about evaluating funding offers is to make sure you understand the whole package. So in addition to kind of the cost of living, look at what the offer is actually giving you. So tuition and fee coverage, like what is included, you know, the stipend or the salary, you know, what expenses can you expect as part of this, and any requirements that they have, as well as the duration of the offer. You know, so for example, there are some universities that will kind of frame their offer letter in the way that you are getting like X dollars, but then out of that X dollars, you have to pay for tuition or fees or other supplies and things like that. There are other offer letters that will tell you, you know, you're going to get, you know, free tuition, plus you're going to get this salary and these. So just make sure if you're kind of reading through different types of offer letters that you're understanding, okay, this is the amount of money that I'm getting, and these are the expenses that I am going to be expected to pay, whether that's some kind of student fee or the tuition or other types of fees there. And if you ever have questions about anything with that, don't be afraid to reach out to the graduate administrator in your program, or if it's a faculty member who's giving you an RA offer, you can reply back and ask questions if it's not clear to you what the offer is saying. So don't be afraid to do that at that point. In addition to kind of the money part, you also want to consider, you know, professional development opportunities and fit. So, you know, will you have opportunities to go to professional conferences? You know, what types of resources are available to you in this particular lab group or at this particular university? And then also, what does it feel like? What's the fit there? You know, how well does that position, especially if it's a research assistantship, how well does that align with your true interests? And if one position aligns better than another, you know, then that is a factor in this. And then in addition to kind of the research alignment, when I think about fit, I also just think about the culture of the lab group or the university or the department. And I know that for many of our international students, you're not able to actually visit the different universities that you may be admitted to, but many of them will at least hold online, you know, sessions where you have a chance to maybe talk with some current students, get a sense of what it might be like. If there's not something formal, make sure that you are reaching out yourself. You know, you can usually find like the grad students who are listed on the website for a particular department or working in a certain research area. And if not, you can ask the department, you know, could I talk to some students who are doing research in this area and get a sense from them, right? You know, hop on a Zoom or something and learn what's it like to be there. For those of you who are in the US, many universities will do an admitted student visit so that once you are admitted to the university, some of them will fully fund a trip. Some of them will just give you partial funding to be able to come and see what the university is like, visit with the faculty, meet the other grad students, and really be able to assess that personal fit that you have there. And I kind of already mentioned this, but it's worth reiterating, you know, it's okay to ask questions. We don't expect you to know all the answers. We know this is kind of a new process for many who are coming through it. So feel free to email the faculty who's making the offer or the graduate administrator for your program and ask those questions. The one caveat I will say, make sure that you are looking at websites and really reading through and trying to understand everything before you email, because you don't want to be emailing questions where there's a very clear answer on the website or in your offer letter, right? You've got to make sure that you are doing your research, putting in a good faith effort, and then you could say, hey, I was looking at this, I'm still not clear about this. Can you explain this further? And people are happy to help if they can tell that you've tried to do as much of your homework as you could, you're trying to understand, then we're here to help you do that. And the last thing I'll say here before I come to my closing slides is, funding is really important, right? We all know that, but it's also not everything. There are a lot of different factors that go into your graduate experience. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to finish your graduate experience and what comes next, right? We want to be preparing you for whatever your next step is, whether you want to go into academia, whether you want to be a researcher in a major lab, whether you want to work more in industry or do something more entrepreneurial or government or whatever it is that you want to do, like that's really the ultimate goal. And the question is, what path is going to get you there the most effectively, right? And so funding is a very important key to that as you prepare for graduate school. And hopefully all of you receive many funding opportunities to many different universities, and you have your choice among them. But I just want to caution and just always say, to always take a step back and make sure you're also looking at the big picture. And especially if you have offers that, are fairly close and, maybe this one's a little higher, but this one is really a better fit and you feel like it's going to set you up better for your future career. Always keep that broad perspective as well in terms of what direction you want to go afterwards and which path do you think is really going to get you there and beyond, because the beyond is where we're trying to go and our goal there. So after today, a couple of things, a couple of action items for you to be thinking about. If Purdue is a university that you are considering for grad school, and I hope it is, I kind of already mentioned we're very well known for our engineering programs. We're the .1 producer of graduate engineers in the country. Take this opportunity to, again, take a look at the websites. If you go out to the cngr.purdue.edu/grad programs, that's going to list out all of our different grad programs with links out to their websites, a lot more great information. You can see what kind of research is going on, what kind of amazing facilities we have, and just learn more about the programs that we have. If you are interested, I absolutely encourage you to attend this event. If you have not heard of it yet, it's the Virtual Grad Showcase. It is coming up here in just a couple of weeks on September 29th to 30th. It's fully online, so you can join us from anywhere. There is both live sessions as well as on demand. We have program information sessions that are led by each of our schools of engineering. And so if you're interested in, for example, mechanical engineering or electrical and computer engineering, you can attend a session with faculty and graduate administrators from those programs. You'll be able to ask them questions if you have them, hear more about their program from them. And we repeat those sessions, one on Sunday evening and one on Monday morning local time, so that hopefully we catch some of those different time zones and you're able to join when it's not 3:30 in the morning like some of our friends are on here tonight. It's free registration, and if you attend the event and answer a couple of questions that we have that are part of an application fee waiver process, you can get a free application fee waiver to Purdue, which means you can apply to Purdue for free. And those fee waivers are good for 2 years. And so if you attend this year, you can apply anytime in the next 2 years to be able to come to Purdue. So you can Google Purdue Virtual Grad Showcase, or I'll again put the link in the chat here as we wrap up and do some of these resources. But definitely take a look at that. It's a great event and a great way to get an application fee waiver to Purdue as well. All right, that is going to bring me to the end of my slides here. Let me grab a couple of these links that I had said I would share with you and get those in the chat, and then I will come back and look at the chat. So feel free to stick some of your... All right, I'm just going to give you this whole list all at once. And I will try to send out the recording and the slides to this presentation as well. So you'll have some of these links in that and kind of watch this and then see some of this information again. But there's some basic information for you. All right, let me see what I can do here for the chat. For the application session that was yesterday, the recording will only be going to those who registered. So if you were registered for it, you should get a copy of that recording. Otherwise, that is not publicly available, unfortunately. But if you are interested in that type of information, definitely come to the grad showcase. And I should also mention, so I think I started to say it and didn't finish. We have the live sessions that are part of the grad showcase. There's also a lot of on-demand content. So we have a lot of pre-recorded videos out there similar to this topic. And there will be some application tip videos and things out there. So register for the grad showcase. Even if you can't attend the live sessions, at least watch the recorded and you'll get some information there. So hopefully that helps you out. This is a question that I see often. I'm glad you brought it up. It's a good one. If you're graduating early, kind of during the off semester, so say you're graduating in December, is there less funding available? And the short answer is yes. Unfortunately, I don't want to mislead you. If to start like in a January term, there often is less funding available. The positive spin on that is there's also usually less students applying for that funding because most students will start in the fall in kind of that regular time frame. The thing to watch for, with a January start, there are some programs who do not even admit with January. So make sure that the discipline you're interested in, the program you're interested in, does have a January start. And then I would talk to them about funding and find out what their process is for a January start student, because it can be a little bit different sometimes from the fall. Because most fellowship funding is available in the fall, there usually are not fellowships available in January. And so you're reliant more on those research assistantships, teaching assistantships, and things like that. It can happen. We have a lot of students who start in January and come in funded. There are faculty who will often get grants kind of off cycle as well, right? So maybe they just got the news from their funding agency in October that they received a grant. Well, then they're going to be looking to hire students for January because they kind of missed that that fall start. So they're going to be looking for that January. So yes, in general, there is less funding to start off cycle, but it does exist. The other thing you can do, and I encourage students to do this, you can always apply for that January start. If you are not able to find funding, you can always defer your admission. You can defer it to the fall, and that gives you an extra term to keep looking for funding and to kind of get back in the cycle there to be able to do that. So something to talk to the specific people in your department, what advice they have, because again, they may have specific funding mechanisms, but those are kind of some general things I can say about that. Okay, yeah, engineering management is a professional master's program. And so that is one that is not eligible for a lot of these types of funding. They are eligible for like hourly appointments and things like that. And if you reach out to them, I think they may even have a webpage where they kind of talk about funding and how some of the students in that program have funded their program. But in general, that is a professional master's. You would not be eligible for assistantships. You would not be eligible for fellowships. Let's see. Sorry for the pause. I'm just kind of scrolling through. I want to make sure I don't miss any here. What percentage of grad students receive TA positions? I don't have an exact number there. Kind of like I mentioned across the board, about 66% receive some kind of assistantship, 70 total, including fellowships, and about 66 are assistantships. It will depend on, the department, how big the department is, and also, the discipline. One other thing that I didn't mention that's important to mention about TAs is you don't necessarily have to have a TA in your department. So say you're a mechanical engineering student and they don't have any more TAs available for you. You can also apply for TAs, for example, in mathematics, because some of those, more general education majors require a lot more TAs because they have a lot more undergrads that are coming through that have to take kind of those general education credits. And so you can apply for a TA in something like mathematics or statistics or some of those related fields where maybe you have, some strong skills, because a lot of our engineers have strong mathematical skills, but it's outside your department. Another area that I see, particularly some of our international students, is the foreign languages and literature area. They're often looking for TAs to teach their courses. And if you are, a native speaker in whatever language that they are looking for a TA, then that can be a really good fit as well. So some other things to be aware of related to TAs. Federal financial aid like FAFSA, it is available for grad school. There are federal loans that are available for grad school as well. Some of the criteria are different than for undergrad, and I'm not as familiar with some of the financial aid loan stuff. So that's something I can't speak to a lot, but there are some. Just take a look at it. I want to say this is something to check. You have to watch, kind of the subsidized versus unsubsidized. And I think when you get to the graduate level, there's generally not as much subsidized loans, which means that you're paying interest right from the start of taking out that loan. But again, I'm not an expert in the loan area, so I don't want to say any more about that, but it is an option. So definitely look into it more. That you would talk to somebody in like the Division of Financial Aid. The financial aid office is the one who handles kind of the loans and that aspect. And that is very different from, the assistantships and the fellowships that come through. If you remember, the assistantships in particular are considered employment of the university. And so that's very different than, kind of loans and scholarships and things like that. Okay, if it come on an assistantship instead of a fellowship, are there additional benefits? And then if I work 20 hours per week, how much money would I receive per month for living expenses? Yeah, okay. So in general, the assistantships and fellowships, if we're talking about a full fellowship, then the benefits largely are going to be the same. So like the internal fellowships we have here at Purdue, they give the free tuition, the salary, everything else on top of that. There's not really additional benefits to having an assistantship versus that. The amount of money that you would make, it's going to vary depending on the position. Here at Purdue, the minimum is $28,000, so a year, I should say. So you'd be making $28,000. This is for a half-time appointment. Many of our engineering programs will pay more than that, and a lot of our opportunities you'll get paid more than 28. But that'll give you an idea. 28,000 is what you would be making per year. And if your employer covers Purdue Online, does it also cover Purdue normal classes? You'd have to check with your employer. I would think it would. I think the challenge there would be, depending on what type of work schedule you have, since most kind of, quote unquote, normal or in-person classes are offered during the day. If that conflicts with your work hours, I could see a conflict there. But you have to check with your HR area or whoever kind of covers your employee benefits. But in general, if they offer tuition, I would think it would cover either one, as long as you had supervisor approval to be, taking the class whenever it is. Okay. Yeah, and kind of this question, you had at one point somebody who had offered you an appointment, had to cancel it because of visa issues, now reapplying, doesn't have the funding there anymore. Kind of what do you do? Yeah, and these types of situations can happen, right? There's a lot of fluidity in funding. And this is another thing to be aware of is when you're applying, and it's kind of true with kind of the application admission process as well as with the funding process. Some of it is just timing and, to some extent luck, right? It's how things fall sometimes, right? If a faculty member that you're interested in working with may be a really good fit, may be interested in working with you, but they don't have funding. Like they didn't get a grant that they expected that they were going to get, or, it's been a couple of years since they had a grant and their lab is full, they've already got PhD students in there. And so they're just not recruiting this year. And that happens. And it might not be because you're not a strong student or because you're not a good fit, but just because the funding isn't there. And so a lot of it is just trial and error and being aware of kind of the timing there. In these types of situations, it's kind of the same of if you're starting fresh, you have to be reaching out to different faculty members. If you already have been in touch with somebody who's engaging with you, and like in this case, had a previous offer, but now is saying doesn't have funding, are there individuals that faculty member can refer you to? Do they know someone who's doing similar research to help you kind of continue your search? And otherwise, it's a matter of looking at these different opportunities, look for those fellowships that you can apply to, and just be reaching out to faculty and explaining what your research interests are and how you want to pursue there. All right, let me see where I am at here. Can you be part of one department and be eligible for another department's internal fellowships? Generally, no. If it's a kind of a school-specific fellowship, so for example, if mechanical engineering has a fellowship, they are going to award it to mechanical engineering students. And so you would need to be looking for fellowships within your area. What requirements make a student the top 4% for getting a fellowship? Yeah, great question. So it's a lot of academic record, right? So what is your previous education? So how strong is your GPA? What courses did you take? Were you taking like advanced courses as an undergraduate or as a master's student? Because we have master's students that are coming in for a PhD. What's your GPA there? What research have you done in the past? So if you are an undergraduate, have you participated in a summer research program? Did you participate in academic year research with a faculty member, either for credit or for pay, or sometimes just for volunteer? Do you have a publication? Right? As a master's level student, that would absolutely be an expectation, right? If you already have a master's and are applying for a PhD, the bar is going to be much higher for what they expect, right? If you are an undergraduate student, there's not an expectation that you have a publication, but certainly if you do have one, that's going to bump you up into that higher category. So if you have worked on a research project and are part of a paper or presentation, did you present a poster as something? Did you, conduct stuff there? And then really strong essays. And I'm sure a lot of this was kind of covered in the application tips as well, because again, that application for admission is the same thing that they use for these fellowship considerations of how strong are your essays? What's your interest, where are you going, what's your background, your passion, how well does that research align with what the university has to offer, how well do you fit that department? And then really strong letters of recommendation, and a lot of it has to do with the research. So if you have done research before, really strong letters from those research advisors to be able to do that, and being able to show in some of your statement of purposes and your research statements that you have a concept of research, like what research is, and that you can kind of think strategically about things and all those other kind of soft characteristics as well, right? Determination, perseverance, that you've done this. So there's a lot. It's a very holistic review, and there's never going to be one candidate that has like everything, right? But many of those different qualities that you can bring, the more competitive that you're going to be. All right, can someone be eligible for both fellowship and assistantship at the same time? Is this allowed? It kind of depends what you mean by eligible. If you mean like, can they hold both a fellowship and assistantship at the same time? Generally not. You can certainly be applying for them both and get awarded both. And kind of like I mentioned before when I was talking about fellowships, if you get more than one award, there I was talking specifically about fellowships, but it would apply here as well. If you had an assistantship offer plus a fellowship offer, most likely you would need to choose one, but you may be able to stack them. So for example, maybe you start with maybe you're able to defer the fellowship, you start with the assistantship. If a professor, for example, has a grant and they're like, I need this research done, I have this grant funding for the next year, you do that assistantship, and then when you're done with that, you go on to the fellowship. So there are definitely ways to kind of stack them if you get more than one offer, and you talk to the supervisors and the people who are offering those different opportunities, and you just identify what makes the most sense for you. Sometimes you get offers from multiple places and it's not possible to defer one or delay one, and then you have to just choose. You have to decline one and take the other. But in general, you can't have both at the same time, but you could get offered both and potentially defer one of them. All right, so we are coming up on the end of our time, and I believe I also made it through all of the chat questions.